Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Adyen Talk session. My name is Jean-Mies. I am Adyen's president for Latin America. And today I'm hosting in English our last Adyen Talks of this third season. In the last few months, we had interesting sessions with leaders from the digital and retail space. And we discussed several topics like the impact of COVID-19 on different businesses. We also discussed the preparation expectations for Black Friday 2020. And in this last season, we spoke about digital transformation across different industries. This time, I'm super happy to have two of Adyen senior executives joining me in this session. So I have with me Roland Prins, Adyen's Chief Commercial Officer, together with Cameron Zaki, Chief Operating Officer. To provide you a little bit of context about Roland and Cameron, Roland has joined Adyen in 2007 and has been in the payment industry for more than 20 years. Prior to joining Adyen, Roland held various management roles in sales and business development. Cameron joined Adyen in 2014, and prior to being appointed COO of the company, he was president for North America. And Cameron gathered his experience at companies like PayPal and Netflix. So Roland, Cameron, happy to have you here. Welcome to Adyen Talks.
Thank you.
Be here.
So before I start with the questions, I want to remind all of you watching us today to don't forget to submit your questions that we will address during the talk. All right. So let me jump right into it. I'm going to start asking a few questions to both of you. I'm going to start with you, Cameron. I think your background in the payments industry, your long experience in some of the most innovative companies in the world takes me to a very interesting question that I would like you to reflect on. And this is, what, in your opinion, does digital transformation mean for the payments industry?
It's a good question. I think often people get caught up in what it means for us as a kind of payments geeks, but I think it really starts with why is someone doing a payment, right? And usually it's because you want to buy something, a good or a service. So I think the way we think of it at Adyen is what's going on in the digital transformation of our customers and other industries, right? Be it retail, travel. You have players like Netflix, you mentioned, I used to work there, who've sort of reinvented how we consume video content, right? Or Spotify for digital audio. So it really starts with, if I'm a customer of them or Amazon or eBay, what's the problem I'm having? How do we make it easier for people to consummate that purchase, right? And really enjoy the goods or services that they wanted to. Ironically, most people don't remember their payments experience unless it was a bad one, right? You remember what you set out to buy. And that's sort of our goal of how do we help these companies in various industries and parts of the world with their digital transformation, right? And payments is a critical part of it, but it's usually a much broader transformation. And how can we help them be a consultant, be a partner, and solve some of these new use cases and customer experiences that we're all trying to reimagine. Somebody asked me the other day, I joined PayPal in 2004, and ironically, the iPhone got created a few years later, right? So much has changed in the last several decades and will continue to going forward. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think that's probably all three of us. We've seen an exponential evolution in payments since we started in this industry. I think in general, what we see is that things are moving more and more towards convenience and security across the board, right? I think we're going to elaborate a little bit about this during the call. But I also wanted to hear from you, Roland. You know, there's so much going on in this space, and everybody's talking about digital transformation, and not only now, but also for a few years already. And you heading up our commercial operations globally. Of course, you are in contact with merchants and clients of ours all over the world. So you have a pretty broad vision of what is going on in different regions. So I'm super curious to hear, based on your interactions and contacts with merchants of ours, do you feel that these companies are ready for digital transformation, and what types of challenges do you see that they're facing nowadays?
Yeah, that's we see a lot of that. But before I go into the detail, I'll go back to the thing you discussed with Kaman, like with us being in the payments industry for quite some time, and how much has changed. When Adyen was started, and I joined a few months after, I remember talking to lots of people in the industry, like, "Hey, what are you doing? Yeah, we're starting again with a payments company. We'd like to give it a go." Because we feel there's more room for innovation. And actually quite a few people at that time, and this is 2007, they were like, well, should you really do that? There's already so many players out there. There's that market is already done. Why would you try and get in there? You're going to have to be a price fighter. And there was a lot of skepticism about it at the time. And it's not like we foresaw all this change that was going to come. I mean, we didn't know, of course, but I must say that if you look back on that in those discussions, that's super funny now, because the world's gone upside down in terms of how technology now plays a role. So I often think about that now. Look at how fast that's gone. But I think there's coming back to your question around. What are some of the barriers with customers we're seeing in terms of adopting this digital transformation? It almost feels like there's a pre and post COVID period in that regard, because we've seen, especially in the larger established companies, we've seen so many things that were barriers, either self-created in the sense that in their organization, we used very often come into meeting rooms when we were still in meeting rooms, and there's people meeting each other at the merchant, at the retailer, for the first time, because there were people from the e-commerce department and then people from the retail department, and we very much play in the handling both, connecting online and in-store payments. But these people in these organizations met for the first time. So if that's the case, how can you as an organization really go through this change? Because of course, a digital transformation, it's all about working together towards a common goal, and there shouldn't be these type of barriers, which that's one of them. I think the other thing, of course, much harder to solve, something we have a lot of empathy for from that point of view, is legacy systems. Just if you've built a business over the past 50 years and it's a very successful business, I mean, it's really hard to throw all that old technology out and replace it with something while the business is running. So that's a real difficult problem. And I think what we've seen a lot with larger companies in that space is that some try to address it with innovation labs, completely separate, in a different office, some smart people in a lab trying to create a new world, and often quite successful with the coolest things. But then to try to bring that in their actual organization turns out to be really difficult, because if you create it in isolation, of course you can use all the new things, but to then have the organization adapt it, that's a different thing. So I think what we've seen the companies do more successfully, the alternative approach that we've seen work quite well, is take more pilot approach. Don't isolate it. Start small, yes, but within the actual business. So can you figure out one store, or can you figure out one country or one region or one channel, one product, whatever? Start small, but do it in the actual business with people that are real people in your company that do their day-to-day job that need to go through this change. And that's, in our experience, a much more effective way to try and drive some of the change, because you have people that face a real situation that go through it. But,
interesting. And I think that digital transformation per se is a super complex topic, because, and that's curious, because I was recently reading about it, and I read that last year more than $1 trillion was invested globally by companies, into digital transformation initiatives, all sorts. But ultimately, it doesn't depend solely on the companies themselves. It's not only about investing in IT infrastructure and restructuring your teams and reorganizing or trying to influence your company culture, but it's also, in my opinion, dependent on how you build your partner strategy, right? Because you don't want to do everything on your own. You are still dependent to the companies that you're working with. And if we look at our region here in Latin America, this is even a bigger impact because there's simply no companies in our industry that are really prepared to help merchants solving this equation, right? Which brings me to the question that I also wanted to ask to both of you. So I think that, as I said, digital transformation is quite difficult, but during the pandemic, the challenges certainly were magnified even more, right? So companies felt pressed even more towards, making the step to modernizing their infrastructure and everything. If we look at our latest shareholder letter, we reported that brick and mortar was hit pretty hardly. Of course, 90% of the business that we had coming from stores was lost pretty much from one day to the other. And this was due to COVID, but also due to the fact that companies were still not prepared. So the question that I want to ask to both of you is, for customers to get over those problems and to make this switch and accelerate digital transformations on their side.
Yeah, I'll take a first pass, and Roland, please chime in. I think, luckily we've been talking to a lot of our customers for years, as you know, Jean, about sort of this unified commerce approach, right? And how they look across e-com, mobile, and POS. So I think quite a few of them had been investing in it, and then they were well prepared when all of a sudden physical stores in many parts of the world, or most parts eventually, were shut down, that their e-commerce or mobile capabilities allowed them to keep serving customers, right? But even there, they dealt with a huge surge in volumes. So I think on the payment side, we could help them, but it was logistics and other challenges to also think through. But some of them did have more nascent capabilities, right? Or if you're in luxury goods where people want to come in and look and feel the goods, how do you deal with that? So I think one example innovation that we saw was for people who had call centers or tried to switch that to sort of, hey, Jean, you can do a Zoom call with somebody in a store and they can show you the luxury goods and you can look at the colors and items and pick those. But at the end, how do you do an actual payment transaction? We have something called Pay by Link, right? Where at the end, instead of redirecting you to a website and saying, now go and find that same thing we just talked about, we can help you send them a link, right? Via email or text message or WhatsApp. And when you click on it, you can complete a secure transaction and pay for your goods that way. And then you can do curbside pickup, right? So you don't have to walk into a store or touch anything. And that's something that some of our customers rolled out literally in 24, 48 hours across multiple stores and geographies. And that's something that was eye-opening even for us, right? I think Roland can elaborate on this, but the original use case was to help companies with call centers with this, and it might be a small part of their business. But it's really taken off and something that we've tried to then productize and improve on and see how that can scale for everyone.
Yeah, now I have some similar cases. I think that the thing that's been really impressive that, with these luxury companies, that they're typically companies that take a huge amount of time to plan things carefully. They've been around for a long, long time. So typically they're fairly slow in change, which is fine for them. But then if you see how quickly they reacted and implemented these new solutions, it's been really impressive. And, I wonder whether some of these companies will keep some of this good experience in the effectiveness that this rapid change had on their business to try and build on for the longer term. some other cases we saw was other very traditional companies that were in the home garden tooling business for like hundreds of years, and then for the first time they launched within weeks an e-commerce site, which was quite amazing. But also smaller companies have been incredibly creative. There's this ice cream company that has quite a few in Europe, that has quite a few locations, physical locations, where people can enjoy their ice cream. But of course, they had to shut down, and then they were stuck. But within a fairly short time, they had spun up an app, and with the app specifically made for them, you could order ice cream and have it delivered to your home. They had organized with electrical scooters to have it delivered, all in a secure way. But very neatly, they also included instantly a loyalty model that for every time you ordered ice cream at home, you would earn loyalty rewards, which you could use then later on when the shops would reopen in their store. So they smartly thought about, hey, how can we also give an incentive for people to, when it's possible again, to come to the store, and suddenly they had a loyalty program. And yeah, I think it's incredible how quickly these things can be built suddenly in these type of crisis situations, and it's a very cool to see the creativeness of some of these companies, and there's so many more. That's the beauty of our business, that we're seeing so many different industries and how they deal with it.
Sorry, John, if I can just piggyback. I think that's one of the things that we are seeing for a lot of brick and mortar environments. I think loyalty is always key, right? But they would typically ask Roland when he came in, could I get your email address? Could I get your physical address or your phone number, so that they could then send him promotions or track when he was buying. But often many of us avoid doing that, right? Now, all of a sudden, if he's using the app or it's an e-commerce transaction, he's more willing, or you're sort of automatically providing that information. And that's something we're seeing across retail, but also Roland's example, food and beverage, right? And not just small ice cream shops, but you're seeing it across quick serve restaurants, right? The Subways and McDonald's of the world that we're all ordering on apps for either pickup or for delivery. And they have a lot more information about us that lets them then customize offers to us and makes it easier next time my kids want a burger or a pizza, right, to just say repeat order. So I think that's, again, improving the customer experience, partly out of necessity, but it's pretty amazing to see how people are trying to take the positives out of this unfortunate situation.
No, I agree, and I think that the beauty of it is that we provide the means for companies to do that, right? So we've had a few examples here in our region as well. So, for instance, we work with a local brand called Amaru that is a fashion retailer, and once they saw all their stores closing down, they used Pay by Link that you mentioned before, Cameron, to interact with their customers via WhatsApp, engage them, help them to in their fashion aspirations and desires, and then use Pay by Link to also sell products to them over WhatsApp, which worked extremely well. So as both of you said, it's sometimes really impressive how quickly companies can adapt if something like that happens, right? I already received the first question here that I would like to address probably to you, Roland. It's a question from Matthew Donahue from Klarna. He's asking if we can speak a little bit about technology adoption with COVID, which you already did, but also more specifically talking about QR codes. He's referring to places like Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, that we implemented a pretty interesting solution. So if you could maybe share a little bit on that.
Yeah, and I'll start with a personal experience of the need for it, because I think all of us have seen so many weird implementations and companies struggling with this, right? We're all looking at all these companies were figuring out, how do we deal with the inability to touch, and still we want to do business. And I had the local bakery close to where I was over the lockdown period here in Holland, and yeah, they had their payment terminal, and people want to pay with chip and PIN in the physical setting, but they didn't have anything else. And then what they had figured out, like, oh, they put like a box of Q-tips right next to the payment terminal so that people could stick their card into the terminal to pay, grab a Q-tip and use the Q-tip to punch in the PIN code. But it was all set up like that, and they had this sanitizer. And twice I've been there, and I paid everywhere with Apple Pay, but twice I went in there and I accidentally punched over the box with Q-tips. All these Q-tips are on the floor. Yeah, and of course you can't use them anymore because they're no longer. Yeah, it's really really painful for so many companies, and therefore we've seen, coming back to the question, we've seen lots of fast adoption of new technologies to create remote commerce, as you can say. And Rijksmuseum is, I think it's well known. They've really made a big step into really going cashless. They'd been thinking, it's one of these examples, they had been working on becoming a cashless museum for quite some time, but there, feels like there's a bit of a hump to really make the decision. This made that decision much easier for them. So they've turned into a fully cashless. When they reopened at some point, of course, they reopened as a cashless museum, and they have QR codes around the building, and they are all about art and experience. So the QR codes are not these black in your face QR codes, but they blend and take some of the beautiful artworks, and that's how they theme the QR code. And that's, you can scan, purchase ticket, walk in. Everything is done digitally, and yeah, it's a great step forward. So that's something that the interesting thing about QR codes, we're seeing them everywhere now. Whereas, a few years ago, you'd be in China and like, wow, it's amazing, these QR codes. Have you seen them? And incredible. And then everybody's like, yeah, that's really for China perfect, but it's never going to happen here. We have chip and PIN. We have all these other ways to pay. But now, yeah, QR codes, go to any restaurant and bar and you see them. And of course, we're looking at that because they're great ways to, for people that don't want to touch, that don't per se are, as advanced as some people aren't ready for things like Apple Pay or don't carry a phone like that. QR codes enable all sorts of digital payment methods, and it's a way to enable that. So yeah, reality's caught up a bit on the QR codes here.
Absolutely, yeah.
But avoid the Q-tips.
Let me now elaborate a little bit on a different aspect of this pandemic, of the COVID-19 situation, because as I said before, of course, we saw brick and mortar stores, physical stores shutting down, volumes dropping significantly. At the same time, of course, we see e-commerce volumes in our platform growing tremendously, right? So, and the interesting side is that this is not only coming from merchants or customers who are migrating their volume over, but it's also caused by completely new demands coming up, right? So if I give you a few examples from our region again, we've seen, of course, a surge in transactions coming from food delivery companies and companies that are really dealing with the fact that people don't want to or cannot go out anymore to shop for groceries and food, right? At the same time, you also see that many traditional retailers have invested a lot and are migrating or pushing their volumes to the online channels. Now, what I've heard many times in several discussions is, people trying to foresee whether this will be a lasting trend, in the sense, will less people come to the stores because they're now more used to using online channels. Another example here in Brazil, for instance, we had a huge increase in online transactions from elderly people who have never used online channels before, right? So my question to both of you is, what is your opinion on that? Is this a lasting trend? How can it impact, or will it impact traditional retail looking forward?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, this was already a trend, right? I mean, we saw people switching from physical to digital, right? Whether mobile or e-commerce to some extent already. I think COVID has probably accelerated that. My personal view is that I don't think it means the death or permanent extinction of physical, depending on what you're looking to buy. I think sometimes all of us want to go in and see things in person, right? And be able to, without Q-tips, touch and feel in a secure way the item before we make a purchase decision. So I think there will always be a place for that, but this is absolutely accelerating the trend towards digitization, right? I think the other thing is, even in a physical environment, mobile existed, right? I mean, contactless transactions were very common in many parts of the world and were starting to take off in the US also, right, before this. So I think the lines will continue to blur of what is a digital transaction, what's a physical. Do you order online, pick up at curbside? How do you return that transaction or item? So in my opinion, I think this is absolutely going to accelerate the trend, but I think hopefully once it's safe to venture out more and more often, we will still find a combination and continue to iterate on what's that ideal customer experience, right? That reduces friction. And also today we have a challenge, Jean, of I think there's a lot more fraud, right, online in remote commerce. And so I think there will always be this sort of balancing act of the customer experience, the speed, the convenience versus security that we will hopefully be helping our customers manage across these different channels and different payment methods. But would love to hear what Roland thinks and also you, Jean.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I have another experience because it is the fraud thing is challenging because with so many people flocking to online commerce in that window, quite a few people, yeah, for lots of retailers, it was a fantastic way to help so many more customers and keep their business alive. But they weren't really set up to suddenly take so much more online traffic. So that meant, of course, more potential fraudsters and less people to be able to deal with it. And I think that's some people have learned some hard lessons around that and are now following that. And one of the things that we experience here is my wife actually bought a perfume online with a department store that's, we've been going to for a long time. So you would assume they know you and your history, etc. But the package came after a few days and she opened it up and it should have been a nice perfume bottle, but she took the wrapper off and then there's a rock. There's a rock in the box. And the box was perfect. There's a rock in there. And she's like, what's this? And for her to get the rock replaced with the real product and have some sort of customer experience like, sorry about the fact that we sent you a rock. We're really sorry. Let us exchange it. They were like, what? No, you can't. That's impossible. We don't believe you. So it was actually quite a hassle to make clear that it was really a rock. And then in the end, they're like, well, okay, for this time we sent you something else. Whereas if you just would have looked at the actual purchase history for years, everything, the only sound thing to do was like, what? We're really sorry. We're instantly sending you a new one. And here's some extra, but you just saw they were overwhelmed with things going on. New people that weren't trained, and that's tough. It's not easy. How do you deal with it if you suddenly have to deal with such a situation? But those are some of the negative effects that you find.
No, absolutely. I think that this is definitely the downside of this whole transition towards digital transactions and e-commerce over the years. It also bears risks, right? So to give an example, here in Brazil, we've seen during this pandemic alone in the market a 5-fold increase in fraud attempts in e-commerce, right? And that was to be expected. So it's extremely important for companies to be prepared to deal with that because all of a sudden they don't have the customer in front of them anymore. They cannot many times not recognize them anymore and see if they're actually buying a perfume or a rock, right? So what is Adyen's vision on that? How do we help merchants to deal with the situation?
I think there's we've had of course our vision is we'd like to give merchants the insight, and we'd like to really help them getting a much better understanding of customers, who the customers are, when, how they're shopping, what their preferences are, etc. And payments tend to be a fantastic way to help create that, and that's what we're very much focused around. So as a result, for years we've been working on this unified commerce omni-channel payments offering, where we feel we can unlock so much of this data for our customers by combining the two. And we've had a lot of companies implement that over the years, but still for many they were, okay, we're now running in store with you, we're running online with you, great. But still the real promise of unified commerce, the better customer experiences, these insights, we're always a bit in the future, and we're working gradually towards. And then again, this happened, and we've seen now a few cases where with some of these companies, we could really help them with the data. So one example was a UK-based luxury store. They were working with us for quite some time, online, in-store, then all the stores closed, everybody, massive growth online. And they had discussions internally on board level in their company, like, oh, wow, that's all the existing customers that have now shifted online, right? That's what's happening. Whereas in their company, people in the e-commerce team were like, no, we don't think so. We think we've attracted a lot of new customers actually by this who didn't have any other choice. They have now found us. So there are a lot of assumptions there. And then with our data, because we could tell them, hey, we see so many people that are now shopping online that have never shopped with you in the past 12 months in any store. We have that data. So we give them real specific information, which changed their view completely, which is very valuable, of course. And another thing where we could help companies when another, again, a UK chain, they were reopening after lockdown, and in reopening that happens gradually. So they were thinking about how should we prioritize the 100 stores we're going to reopen, and there we could give them data to tell them exactly like, hey, these stores are stores that have much more a shopping crowd that are really local, versus these stores have much more international crowd because of they're in Oxford Street, lots of tourists. The tourists aren't there, so prioritize those stores first, and we could help them with like their opening prioritization. So what we've seen, and that's very much what we like to do. If you ask, how do we think about how can we help these companies? Well, this is what we like to help companies with, getting a better understanding to help run the business more efficiently, help identify, help customers better, and that's we've seen the first real cases now of how that can be done. So we learn a lot right now.
Great. Cameron, want to add something to that, or?
No, I think I always struggle to come up with stories as good as Roulant's. I should have prepared. The other thing I would add on is I think we can, again, back to Roulant's point with the data, also help them figure out how people want to pay, right? And we see differences in the payment methods that people use in store versus online. Some are just inherent. So for example, here in the US, everyone will find it strange, but in many parts of the world, as you guys know, your two countries, you cannot always use your debit card for online transactions, right? In the Netherlands, you use something called Ideal, which is a different experience than a card experience. And in Brazil, thanks to all the work Jean, you and team have done, a lot of the banks are starting to allow it, right, selectively. But in the US, everyone takes it for granted. But when you go to Brazil and you go to Netherlands, we can help educate them of, hey, here's the payment methods and how they work offline and how they work online. And then to Roulant's point, we can look at the data and show them how do people want to pay across these different channels, or when they're omni-channel experiences, right? So I think it's that, and then also on risk and fraud, right? Some of these payment methods are inherently higher risk, right? They're more consumer centric or merchant centric. And so really we try and provide a lot of consultative help. It's not just the product and the technology, but help them really understand their business, their users, and how they optimize the mix of getting conversion, right? Incremental users, highest approval rates, but also what's the balance with fraud and risk mitigation. And I think that's hopefully something they really value and that we want to keep investing in.
Oh, wonderful. This brings me into my next question. We actually received a question from Karina Saxland, who's asking, how do you help merchants to optimize revenues by optimizing payments performance? And I think that already starting to answer this question, I think it all comes down to to being able to solve the challenges of having segregated or legacy platforms, right? So once you have the possibility to operate everything in one single platform, you have much more data, much more information that you can use to process your payments and to improve auth rates. But maybe we can, go a little bit into this specific topic. If you think about the merchants that you are working with in the US, in Europe, and across the globe, what types of problems are we actually solving by offering a unified platform, and how is this impacting payment performance?
Yeah, I'll take a first pass, and I'm sure Roland has a good story on this one too. I think a few different dimensions. One is global, as you mentioned, Jean, right? So I think for a lot of companies, it's helping them understand how do people pay in other parts of the world, right? Credit or debit cards are often the most common way in many countries, but there are also cash-based payment methods, even for e-commerce and mobile, right? Or bank-based payment methods that are very popular. So helping educate them on those and which ones they should accept and how to do so, and what are the sort of demographics that appeal to each. I think two is then for each of those, how do we improve the conversion rate, right? So again, even if we take the card example, that's most common to many people. Often, because cross-border or e-commerce transactions are perceived as higher risk, merchants will decline those, right? So you may only get 90 out of 100 approved versus in the physical environment, 98. So how can we pass either incremental data, right? So like 3D Secure or things like that. Or we use machine learning to really look and say, how does each issuer react to the technical message we're sending, right? How should the fields be formatted? What will really yield the highest conversion rate for our customers, and optimizing down to that level as well. And then it's always a balance, as we were discussing, right, with risk and fraud. So you don't want an approval rate that's likely to become a refund or a chargeback at the end of the day. So how do you find the balance of false positives and negatives? And so I think, again, coming back to data, how do we utilize rules, but also increasingly machine learning to really optimize on those things. But sorry, Roland, I think you were also going to chime in with a few.
Yeah, no, then it's along the same lines, but I think if you think about approval rates, and for a lot of people outside the payment industry, it's quite a abstract item and hard to understand. If you do a card payment, why would a bank not approve it if it's a valid card? And the background to that is that the whole payments network and the whole landscape out there is still largely run on very old technology. So behind every time you pay with a card transaction is sent through a bank to Visa, MasterCard networks, and then ends up with a system for the issuing bank that issued the card to the cardholder. And that issuer runs old technology often that will do all the processing and will tell to the system whether or not the card is approved. And there might be small things why it would trigger a decline that you can change, you can influence. And a lot of people don't really understand that. And that leads to, for certain merchants, sometimes 1-2% higher approval rates. And for big numbers, that's huge revenue. So it's ultimately a lot about, using newer technology to change, very much a legacy infrastructure. And that's a way to get to more efficient, successful payments. I think a completely different area where we're now looking at also to help lots of our retail merchants is to go beyond just processing payments and give them more revenue in that way, but also more and more helping them service their customers better, so that those customers, like to come back more often to that merchant. And one of the things is around helping them create loyalty programs that are more effective than what they used to be. The bakery I told you about earlier, they still have these cards where they put a pen X on 10 times before you get something. We see a lot of focus around, app-based loyalty programs right now. And we're not really a company focusing right now on running our own loyalty program. But what we can do is, enable what's called card-linked loyalty, for example. So every time a consumer pays with a card online or in store, you can automatically recognize and add points to the loyalty program. So you make the loyalty program, you make sure that it works online and in store seamlessly. And secondly, you make sure that it always captures everything without someone having to do anything like thinking about the card, picking that from their wallet. No, it's just there. So there are ways that we can help retailers make the experience more frictionless, and people like that. They're going to come back more often.
Mm-hmm. I think that if I draw a parallel to what we're seeing here in the market as well, with regards to to making payments more seamless, I think one of the big challenges that we're seeing here is still around this specific topic. So how do you ensure that payments are easier to conduct and safer at the same time? So to give an example, in Brazil, there are way more debit cards issued than credit cards, right? So the penetration of debit cards is much, much higher. But within e-commerce, debit cards are hardly ever used because the payment process for a debit card used to be extremely difficult, right? So you would have to authenticate the transaction via your issuing bank, which would bring you out of the environment of the store, a really bad experience. And since we implemented 3DS 2.0, which is an authentication protocol that allows you to stay within the same store environment and make an authentication via biometrics or like a PIN or something like that is sent to you by an SMS. The penetration and the use of credit cards within our merchant base has increased extremely, right? So it's really about solving fundamental problems of the different regions and industries that we're serving. So just to draw the parallel for my region here. But if we remain on this topic, let's talk a little bit about innovation. I think this is always the super interesting, exciting topic. We, as I said before, at the very beginning of this conversation, I think that we tend to see a trend towards simplicity, security, in all different types of payment methods, right? But I, of course, have mostly my regional context of Latin America, which I will share in a minute. But I'm really curious to hear, what exciting things are you seeing elsewhere in the world, in Asia, in the US, and in Europe, coming up in terms of payments innovation?
Maybe to start with the so years ago, there's at Adyen we say one of the things that drives us is also to have fun. Years ago we figured, hey, it's April Fools, let's do a joke. And we did a joke. We did like a PR announcement, and we made a whole film of something called facial pay. And we had built a very funny video, we thought. And facial pay had specific thumb technology, because your face would be the payment, but then you had to do this to confirm the payment, that like two-factor authentication. So we thought that was really funny, and one news blog picked it up, and then move forward 6-7 years, in China, facial pay, that's very common. I mean, people pay with their face now. So, something that was like quite funny and a joke, this is never going to happen so many years ago, it's overtaken by reality. And I think I still don't think facial pay like that's going to be all over Europe here, for example, because people, the cultural differences have always been a real big part of how payment methods evolve and how they're successful. So, of course, credit cards, debit cards, electronic payments, they have been around forever, but still in the Netherlands, but in Germany, hardly being used for lots of people. Not because they don't want to use the technology, no, because there's privacy concerns, there's concerns with credit, and those are concerns that aren't part of their cultural nature. So there's much more than the technology that plays a role to what is success in payment methods. That still play a big role, and you do see, of course, the technology is going really fast, and we're seeing global initiatives like Apple Pay, but also Amazon Pay launched and is growing. But there's also lots of local initiatives that take more into account the local requirements, the local cultural awareness, and that's what we're seeing in countries like Norway and Sweden. They all have their local mobile-based, highly innovative payment methods, but built around the local infrastructure. So I think we're seeing it, but you're also seeing some sort of tendency that not everyone is open for one payment method everywhere the same. In Europe, paying with face, not really probably. Whereas in other countries, it's better. So I think that's something to take into account. We often have discussions with people who are like, oh, wow, is this now going to be the payment method everywhere? There's some nuances to it that will remain important, I think. That's why something like Ideal is so important here in the Netherlands, whereas it's funny, it's called Ideal. It's the ideal payment method. Ask consumers. Yeah, it's perfect. It's ideal. I make a payment. It's done. It's secure. I don't have to use a credit card. I don't trust that. But the rationale behind it, Ideal, it's like a cash payment. If I make a payment to a bogus website with Ideal, no way I'm going to get my money back ever. It's gone. Whereas if I pay with credit card, I can say to my issuer, I never received the goods. Can I get the money back? Sure, you can. So Ideal, well, not always, but it's in the culture, and that makes it really interesting to see how these payment methods evolve, I think.
You see the same in the US, in your part of the world, Cameron?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would echo everything Roland said. I think so many of these things are cultural, and it starts with when you're a kid and you're growing up, right? I think things like Ideal are really hard to explain to an American without a sort of a slideshow, right? Or a video, because they think, oh, you mean it's a wallet? And I'm like, no, it's nothing like PayPal. Let me show you a video of how it works. And then they're like, but that's so many steps and so clunky, that's not customer convenient. And I'm like, yeah, but Roland and people in Netherlands care more about security than convenience on average. Not every individual, but that's sort of a trade-off. But Roland and many people in Europe outside of France, maybe in UK, saying, but you guys still use checks. They're like, I was in a grocery store and I was standing behind someone and they were standing there writing a check. And the check has your bank account number on it. How is that secure, right? So I think it really is these perceptions and cultural norms that do take a long time to change, even if technology can move fast. And again, I think that is the challenge if you are or aspire to be a global company, that you really do need to cater to your local audience, and you need to understand from your colleagues on the ground, but that's where we can help, having people in 22 different offices around the world. This is how people like to pay today, right? Here's the trade-offs of it: security, convenience, chargeback protection, and help them make informed decisions and test and iterate, right? In the end, data versus our individual perceptions is usually a good way to make informed decisions on how you go forward. And I think it ties back to what Roland said. That's why we're big believers in let's launch fast and iterate, rather than you could spend a year in a lab or just in ideation and think you're building something perfect and launch it. And then it's like, boom, not what you expected. And then what do you do from there, right? So that's a big part of the Adyen formula and culture, that let's launch things fast, right? They should be some minimum viable standard and expectation, but then let's be prepared to iterate really quickly in partnership with our customers and industry players and go from there.
Agree. In terms of payment innovation, I think that you're absolutely right in saying that there's not a solution one fits all, one for all, right? So because every single market region has a completely different scenario and different patterns and use cases, so to say. But and this brings me to my final question. I think there is a common thread that you see across the world, which is not only what I already mentioned a few times, this strive towards simplicity and security, but also a tendency or a trend towards mobile payments, right? And this, of course, you see especially in regions that have let's say low financial inclusion. So talk about Latin America, some parts of Asia, Africa as well, where you see that people adhere to mobile payments much easier when they're outside of the traditional banking environment. So to give an example, here in Brazil, the central bank is now implementing a payment method called PIX, P-I-X, that is an instant payment method, and that allows people to make payments within seconds at much lower cost than going through the traditional banks and so on. So my final question then is, in your opinion, what effect will this trend towards instant payments and simplification have on the traditional card networks, and ultimately also on payment companies like us?
Yeah, I think instant is happening everywhere, right? And to be fair to the card networks, I think that was and is a big part of the value proposition, that compared to checks or some of the cash-based payment methods or others, you get a real-time confirmation, right? When you do a transaction that allows you to get your goods and services immediately and move on. So I think everywhere in the world in general, whether card networks or sort of traditional ACH bank-based networks, I think everyone sees the need to move to more of a real-time environment. So I think that's definitely an ongoing trend. I think the other part comes down to, I think in many parts of the world, you see people are trying to regulators are trying to ensure that they aren't monopolies or duopolies, right? And really democratize payments. And I think that's probably a positive trend for everyone, that hey, it's more of an open playing field and innovation should really win out, and that's better for everyone. I think, but going back to what we were just discussing, local norms and cultures don't change overnight, right? Local preferences and nuances are super important. And I think that's, again, why we offer, and I've lost track, honestly, so many different payment methods around the world, right? Because that's how people locally want to pay. And that's super important for our customers then to be able to accept it. And given the large number every year, I think next year will be the year we don't add too many more. And I'm surprised with new ones. And to Roland's point, not just new countries we're going into, but PIX in Brazil or new mobile variations in the Nordics that I think, give us a chance to reduce some of that complexity and help our customers. But I think definitely will be an ongoing sort of challenge for everyone.
Yeah, and in light of it, if you think about it, how much cash is still out there, it's incredible. And there's so much efficiency that can be obtained by having more electronic ways of payments in so many situations, that there's still a big road ahead of us. So yeah.
I completely agree. I think there's a huge opportunity. We're still at the very beginning of a long journey, I guess. Okay, perfect. I think we're through. I think it was a very good conversation. Really want to thank you to join me here today. I think it was very productive. To all of you watching us, thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned. And soon we'll come up with more things. So thank you, Roland, Cameron.
Pleasure,
Talk
Jean.
to you soon.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.